The first thing I noticed when I drove into Midland City wasn't what was there, it was what was missing. No kids on bikes. No screen doors slamming. No laughter leaking out of diners. Just silence and a crisp winter sky hanging too still over southeast Alabama. It had been nearly a year since the headlines stopped, since the lights faded from satellite trucks and the last federal agents packed up. But the town still felt like a place waiting for something to end. They told me not to expect much. There's nothing left to see but dirt and memory. But for me, that was the point. I wasn't after spectacle. I wanted to understand how a 65-year-old man with no criminal record, a reclusive Vietnam vet named Jimmy Lee Dykes, had managed to pull off one of the most disturbing hostage standoffs in recent memory, right under the noses of his neighbors. The dirt road that led to Dykes' old lot was narrow and soft. The woods felt too quiet. There were remnants still, a bent chain-link gate, a patched-over hole in the earth, a rusted-out mailbox with no name. Someone had tried to erase him, but the ground didn't forget. Neither did the town. It just didn't talk much. I started knocking on doors. Some people opened them. Most didn't. One woman, late 60s, stood behind a screen and smoked. She nodded when I asked if she'd lived near Dykes. Yeah, she said. We all did. But you wouldn't call it living near. Man kept to himself. That was a theme. Everyone had a version of the same sentence. He was strange, he was quiet, he didn't bother no one. One man recalled Dykes digging in his yard, like he was going for oil. Someone else remembered him yelling at kids for stepping on his ditch. But no one, not one, thought he was dangerous. Just angry. Just lonely. But they missed things. They missed the way he started reinforcing the walls of his shed. They missed the bags of concrete he hauled in over a summer. They missed the pipes. The wires. The pattern. Dykes wasn't hiding, not exactly. He was broadcasting in a language no one around him could read. Or maybe just didn't want to. The county had cited him once for a homemade speed bump he installed near his driveway. He claimed it was to slow down the federal bastards tailing him. Neighbors rolled their eyes. That's just Jimmy. When he'd show up at town hall meetings, ranting about government mind control and FEMA camps, people would shift in their seats and wait for him to finish. One man, a mechanic, told me he fixed Dykes' truck a year before it happened. He was polite, the man said. Tipped me cash. But he stared. Never blinked. Like he was watching something behind your face. As a reporter, I've learned that monsters rarely look the part. But there's always a signal. A rattle in the distance. A tremor in the air. Midland City had heard it. But they called it static. Background noise. And so, when January 29th came, when a man with a pistol stepped onto a school bus and asked for 2 children, they were shocked. Outraged. Confused. But not prepared. Because evil doesn't knock in towns like this. It crawls under fences. It waits in sheds. It wires its own bunker beneath the roots. I stood at the edge of the property one evening, alone, wind moving the trees. I knelt and touched the cold red soil. Somewhere beneath my boots, Dykes had buried 6 feet of steel, paranoia, and hate, and inside it, a 5-year-old boy who had no idea why the world had gone dark. January 29th, 2013, started like any Tuesday in Midland City. It was cold, but not bitter. Kids climbed onto buses with backpacks bouncing against their shoulders. Parents waved from porches. Everything felt safe, because nothing had happened, yet. Bus Route 4 ran the same loop every morning. It was a short route, about 24 kids, all headed for Destiny Church Elementary. At the wheel was Charles Albert Poland Jr., a 66-year-old with thick glasses, a calm voice, and a quiet heroism nobody recognized until it was too late. Charles had been driving that bus for years. He knew every kid's name, every parent's face, every pothole in the road. He took pride in it. Told friends that keeping kids safe was his real job. Most thought he was just being sentimental. At 3:40 p.m., Route 4 stopped on a dirt road near Dykes' property, a stop like any other. But that's where the script broke. Jimmy Lee Dykes was waiting. He stepped onto the first step of the bus carrying a handgun, a flashlight, and a list. The list had names. He told Charles he was taking 2 kids. Charles blocked the aisle. Said no. There were no theatrics. No shouting. Just a hard line drawn between a man with a gun and a man with a job. Charles refused to move. Dykes fired. Once. Then again. Then a 3rd time. The kids screamed. One dialed 911 from a phone stuffed in her pocket. Some tried to hide under the seats. Others ran. Dykes grabbed a single child, 5-year-old Ethan Gilman, and vanished into the woods. The whole thing took under 2 minutes. I spoke with one of the teenagers who had been on that bus. She's in college now, still flinches at slamming doors. She told me what she remembered most wasn't the gun. It was how quiet Dykes was. Like he'd done this before, she said. Like he was following instructions only he could hear. Charles bled out in the aisle of his own bus. Forensic teams would later find fragments of his wedding ring embedded in the floor where he fell. He never left his post. The police response was fast, but not fast enough. By the time officers reached the area, Dykes had already sealed the door behind him. A steel plate covered with sandbags, sunk deep into the dirt at the rear of his lot. The entrance to his bunker. At first, no one understood what they were dealing with. A child abducted, yes. But to where? And by who? Officers followed tire tracks into the woods and saw the ventilation pipe, disguised as a piece of broken farm equipment, jutting out from a mound of earth. That's when it became clear. This wasn't a spontaneous act. This had been built, measured, planned. Dykes had been preparing for years, wiring the space for power, reinforcing the walls with timber and concrete, lining the ceiling with steel. A single entrance and no windows. A world designed to shut the rest out. And now, somewhere inside it, a 5-year-old boy, small for his age, quiet, with developmental delays and a history of anxiety, was alone with a man who believed the government was his enemy, and that this act was his message. I stood near the bus days later, long after the crime scene tape had fallen slack. The blood was gone, the metal shell cleaned, but it still felt warm with something horrible. Like the seats remembered. Someone had placed a small photo of Charles near the front wheel, held down by a rock. No frame, no caption, just a man smiling at the camera, unaware that one day he'd stop a gunman with nothing but his body. And now, the world was watching a patch of Alabama dirt, waiting to see what would crawl back out of it. No one truly knows what happened inside that bunker for those 6 days, not even the agents watching it from thermal cameras above. But we can piece it together. We know how wide it was, 6 feet by 8. We know how deep, just enough to vanish from view. And we know that inside, 2 people lived face to face in a darkness thick with fear and delusion. Dykes had wired the space for survival, not comfort. 1 army cot, a propane heater, a few LED lights strung along the ceiling, batteries, canned food, water jugs. The floor was plywood. The walls were cold and made from old railroad ties and plastic insulation. No one had stepped inside it but him, until Ethan. I spent a long afternoon with an FBI field medic who had reviewed the logs from those 6 days. He wasn't part of the initial response team, but he saw the transcripts, the pipe communications, the drop-offs. It wasn't just a bunker, he told me. It was a stage. And Dykes thought the whole world was finally tuned in. At first, Dykes spoke through the PVC pipe that protruded from the mound. He told negotiators he had demands, broad, chaotic, and shifting. He wanted media attention. He wanted a woman news anchor, one specific, by name, to arrive and broadcast his final moments. He wanted to expose the government, though what exactly he meant changed by the hour. But inside that cramped space, there was no audience. Just Ethan, 5 years old, with autism, allergic to chocolate, scared of loud sounds. A boy who didn't speak much before this and now barely whispered. What we do know is this: Dykes didn't harm him. Not physically. He gave him crackers, juice, sometimes a toy passed down through the pipe by agents above. But the damage, the real kind, isn't always measured in bruises. Psychologists later said the forced proximity between captor and captive in a space that small can do strange things to a person, especially a child. But strangely, Ethan adapted. He stopped crying after the 2nd day. He started following Dykes' routines. Slept when he slept. Ate when he ate. A negotiator described it as a kind of psychological stillness, like Ethan's mind had folded in on itself to survive. He went quiet, she said. Not passive, just inward. As for Dykes, the bunker was the one place in the world where he had full control. No taxes, no reporters, no veterans' hospitals telling him he needed help. Just silence and steel. From what we know, he never raised his voice, never fired a shot, but he kept the gun close. He'd flash it occasionally when speaking into the pipe. A reminder. They were alone together for 144 hours. A man with a spiral of hatred burning in his gut, and a boy who didn't know why he couldn't go home. It's hard to imagine, but I tried. I walked the perimeter where the bunker used to be, paced it out, 6 by 8. I stood still for 10 minutes. It already felt like a prison. Now add a child's breathing. Add a man muttering about sovereign rights and false flags. Add the thrum of the earth above you, the vibration of boots, the weight of air you didn't control. This wasn't a standoff. It was a crucible. Dykes had built the bunker to keep the world out. But in doing so, he'd also trapped himself in a reality that no longer had exits. And Ethan, small, confused, brave in ways no child should have to be, became his only witness. Not just to a crime, but to a slow collapse of a man who thought this was the only way left to matter. Crisis negotiations are nothing like in the movies. There's no screaming through bullhorns. No countdown clocks. Most of the time, it's waiting, whispering, measuring breaths between silences. And in this case, 6 days of talking into a pipe, never knowing who, if anyone, was truly listening. The FBI's behavioral analysis unit was brought in within hours. They quickly realized that Dykes wasn't operating off a single plan. He was improvising. Paranoid but lucid. Aggressive but polite. A veteran with tactical knowledge, psychological rigidity, and a homemade bunker wired for more than just electricity. He had explosives. That much they were certain of. A small surveillance drone had caught glimpses of wires leading into the mound. Thermal imaging showed heat anomalies in the soil's signature signs of chemical triggers or power lines. And during one exchange, Dykes warned negotiators that if anyone comes through that door, we all go up together. So the pipe, the one thing connecting the underground to the world above, became their lifeline. And their battlefield. I spoke to a former FBI negotiator, not one directly involved, but someone who'd trained those who were. He told me they used a method called flex containment, contain the subject's world while gradually flexing its shape. The idea is to shrink the universe of chaos without letting the subject realize it's happening. But Dykes was resistant to shrinkage. He'd cut conversations short. He'd shift topics erratically. One moment he wanted national news coverage. The next, he talked about microwave signals in his brain. The only consistency? He wanted the world to acknowledge him. To give him a platform. A stage. They played his game to a point. The FBI set up a dummy news truck on a nearby road. They brought in a negotiator trained to sound like a reporter. They offered airtime post-resolution. But Dykes wasn't after a peaceful ending. He wanted spectacle. And through it all, they still had to care for Ethan. The pipe was just 4 inches wide, but it carried the weight of survival. They passed down toys, juice boxes, a blanket. On the third night, Ethan had a fever. His medication, clonidine, was rushed in and lowered carefully, taped inside a chewable vitamin wrapper so Dykes wouldn't feel it was a trick. He accepted it. Barely. By day 5, the team knew time was evaporating. Dykes had started talking about endings. His rants grew longer. He described signals he was getting from the ground. He claimed agents had implanted trackers in his teeth. None of it made operational sense, but it made psychological sense. The spiral was tightening. And then, the moment of rupture. A wire-fed listening device installed near the pipe picked up something new. Dykes speaking to Ethan in short, staccato bursts. Agitated. The word die was caught twice. He wasn't yelling, but the tone was different. Urgent. Harsh. The next morning, a small fiber-optic camera was lowered through a modified portion of the pipe. The image was grainy, green, flickering, but clear enough. Dykes was holding a gun. Not resting it. Holding it. He paced the 6-foot space like a man preparing a last act. And with that, the decision began to crystallize. After 6 days of negotiations, manipulation, psychology, and control, the time for talk was over. Not because they gave up, but because he had. I asked the negotiator, how do you know when it's time to stop negotiating? He paused. When the other side stops listening and starts whispering to the trigger. The camera wasn't part of the original plan. It was a late addition, the result of a sinking feeling shared across the command post that Dykes wasn't going to hand the boy over, no matter what was said through the pipe. It took hours to rig the setup. The ventilation system had a tight bend, and Dykes had partially sealed sections with foam and duct tape. But engineers and agents worked in shifts, threading a pencil-thin fiber-optic line down through the feeder pipe, careful not to rattle or shake anything that might alert him. The final insertion was done during one of Dykes' longer rants, a 14-minute monologue about government satellites. The camera reached the chamber just after 10 a.m. on February 4th. What it showed shifted the room from anxious to frozen. The screen was black at first, then grainy green light, then motion. Dykes was pacing, lips moving, gun in hand. He wasn't seated, wasn't relaxed. His posture was coiled. Ethan sat on the floor beside the cot, legs drawn up to his chest, head resting on his knees. Dykes knelt beside him at one point and leaned close. The camera had no audio, but you didn't need sound to feel the edge. The way he moved, quick, clipped, didn't match the pattern of the previous days. He wasn't maintaining the situation. He was preparing to end it. And then he adjusted something above the cot, reached into a bag, unwrapped a wire. That was it. No red button. No countdown. Just a movement that meant everything to the bomb techs watching. A trigger circuit, small and homemade, was now in his lap. The incident commander turned away from the screen and made a call. The line was brief. The decision was made. I spoke to one of the agents who helped plan the breach. He couldn't go on record, but his voice stuck with me. We weren't trying to kill him. That wasn't the mission. The mission was that no 5-year-old dies on our watch. They'd built a model of the bunker based on ground scans and blueprints found in Dykes' trailer. The plan was surgically tight. A flashbang device would detonate at the roof seam, creating a breach window of 4 seconds. A second team would deploy a tactical device that jammed nearby electronics, in case he had a dead man switch. It was 3:12 p.m. when they went in. The ground shook once, muffled, contained. Then shouting. Then silence. Inside the chamber, Dykes was already on the ground. The gun still in his hand. No explosives detonated. No switches pulled. He was killed instantly in the breach. And Ethan? He was in the corner, curled up but breathing. One of the agents, a father of 3, scooped him into his arms. The boy didn't resist. Didn't cry. He just held on. They carried him out into the February light, eyes squinting from days underground. The image that circulated afterward of a small child in a red sweatshirt being rushed to a van was taken 2 minutes after breach. It became the defining photograph of the whole crisis. I looked at that photo a long time, not because of what it showed, but because of what it almost didn't. That day could have ended 100 different ways. With a crater, with screams, with smoke. But it didn't. Because a wire got seen. Because a voice changed. Because someone in a cold room with a grainy monitor decided, this is enough. The standoff was over. But the story wasn't. When the bunker door opened and Ethan was carried into the daylight, the crowd that had gathered behind the police line exhaled as one. Some people cheered. Others cried. Reporters scrambled to send out headlines before the dust even settled. Child rescued. Gunman dead. 6 days of tension cracked open like a dry bone. But I didn't feel relief. Not immediately. Because I knew something had shifted, not just in this town, but in the air itself. Like something we'd all been trying not to notice finally stood up and stared back. I stayed in Midland City for 2 more days after the rescue. The camera crews packed up fast. Even the agents disappeared quicker than I expected. But the town lingered in its silence. At a gas station on the edge of town, I met a woman who used to deliver mail to Dykes' property. She didn't want her name printed. Said she'd brought envelopes out there for years, left them on the porch even when he stopped answering. He had this way of making you feel invisible, she said. Like you were trespassing in his country. She asked me if I thought he was evil. I didn't answer. Because I wasn't sure that word helped anymore. Later that evening, I sat in my rental car across the road from the now-sealed lot where the bunker had been. It looked like any other patch of Alabama woods, scrub trees, dry grass, red dirt. But somewhere under that soil, even now, were broken boards, scraps of wire, and shadows too deep to rake out. I kept thinking about Ethan. He was released from the hospital 2 days after the rescue. Physically fine. Smiling, even. His mother told a local reporter that he asked for a toy car and a peanut butter sandwich as soon as they got home. But children don't come out of something like that unmarked. Trauma has a quiet way of reassembling the brain, not as a wound, but as a compass that now points somewhere colder. Somewhere inward. I also met a federal agent, by accident, at a diner off Highway 231. He wasn't in uniform. He sat alone, coffee untouched. When I introduced myself, he gave a tired smile but didn't say much. As I got up to leave, he said one thing. I still hear the fan humming. The one in the bunker. It was always running, even in the dark. That stuck with me. Because maybe that's what haunts us the most, not the scream, but the hum. Not the moment of violence, but the low, constant sound of something wrong just beneath the surface. Like wires humming under dirt, waiting for us to listen. We want evil to announce itself with sirens. But most of the time, it wears a tired face, pays in cash, minds its yard, and builds its plans 6 feet underground while we wave from the mailbox. The standoff in Midland City ended with a rescue. But the story it left behind still lingers in the silences, in the things people didn't say soon enough, in the bunker-shaped hole that still exists, not in the earth, but in the way we look at strangers, the way we cross the street, the way we try not to wonder who might be watching, building, waiting. I flew out of Alabama 2 mornings later, but I've never really left, because somewhere, maybe even in your town, someone's hearing that same hum and wondering if it's just static or a countdown